Chances are that your city has been victim of improvisational urbanism. Improvisational urbanism, what is that? Well, to put it simply, improvisational urbanism is when the city is being developed without strategy, based on no research, and keeping fingers crossed that the new proposal will work out in the best possible way. It's like when you're cooking some dish for the first time and you're not sure if you're gonna like it, but you're hoping for the best. Peanut butter, tomato, and carrot, for example. Now you probably wonder, how the is that possible? Well, very simple. In order to initiate improvisational urbanism, all you need is to make a convincing presentation about it, just like this guy over here. First of all, the presentation should be conducted by a well-dressed man that will reflect a pure metaphor of patriarchy. He needs to be holding a stick or a pencil, symbols of education, authority, and erection. And he also needs to use fancy words so he can make sure nobody's following. Finally, even though you're presenting a loose plan for development, you must sound like you have done a master dissertation about it. For example, you shouldn't present like this. And if there is a sufficient funding, a high-rise may be an added value for the neighborhood. No, you have to present like this. And this skyscraper will operate as an anchor point that will shape the future of the city. If this kind of presentation is backed up by finances and media, you got an improvisational urbanism approved, baby. Yes, this kind of urbanism has happened in many cities around the world, but let's take Brussels as a study case. Massive excavation works due to questionable railway extension, speculative car viaduct, covering riverbanks, demolishing neighborhoods. All of this has been done based on improvisation with the urban fabric and no analytical approach. Did it work at least? Well, that's why you're watching Stripping Architecture. Let's see together what is an improvisational urbanism, what is the legacy, and can we eventually benefit from it? Stay tuned. This is the northern district of Brussels. Plenty of high-rises without engaging street level. Whenever we walk around these buildings, we get the impression like we're walking around an area that doesn't seem to fit its own character. You know that feeling when something has been done forcefully? Well, that's what you feel here. Today, this area has been defined as a monofunctional urban segment that was developed by replacing this vibrant urban fabric. Yes, this is the Manhattan Project in Brussels, a crown of the improvisational urbanism that took place in the late 70s. The reason why we define this development as a superior example of improvisational urbanism is because it was literally conceived by one single man. This is Charles de Paul, the promoter who, after he visited New York, he came to an idea to create a little Manhattan in Brussels, a business district that will put Belgium on the map of economical miracles and regenerate the building industry. This idea was strongly supported by the Belgium's Prime Minister, Paul van den Beunen, and silently backed by the King of Belgium as well. Simple as that, the plan was quite direct and to the point. Remove 13,000 people, demolish the existing houses, build grid system of towers, construction of World Trade Center, and be careful, engineering a central highway intersection that will resemble a crossroad of Europe, connecting Lisbon to Stockholm and London to Istanbul. Pretty wild, right? This crazy idea that resembled nothing else but an improvisational approach for achieving delirious solutions was conceived as a general master plan. Just imagine how much confidence, or better say arrogance and power, you must have in order to replace so many people and flatten a whole neighborhood. Now back to the original question, how was it possible for such a lunatic plan to be conducted without much friction? Well, despite the fact that the 70s were years of revisionary urbanism, we claim that this improvisational urbanization didn't come out of the blue. This disgraceful urban act was just the cherry on top that followed a century-long culture of improvisational urbanism. As we mentioned in the beginning, continuous excavation work in the city center, car bridges, covering the riverbanks, and sporadically built boulevards were all improvisational urbanistic activities that normalized ad hoc solutions on a large scale. In addition to this, all these activities have disconnected this doomed neighborhood from the city and with that paved the way for a massive demolition and superior improvisational urbanization. Despite the poor democratic capacity at the time, it seems like the citizens of Brussels were continuously trained to think that the city has to be governed by some mastermind in the backstage that, just like a big brother, will always do the best for the city. Well, was this urban improvisation helpful after all? Let's see. The construction of the railway connection in the city center ended up causing bottleneck effect, where the delay of one train could cause disruption of the whole railway schedule. The car viaduct was dismantled and shipped to Bangkok. Today, the covering of the riverbanks is unanimously seen as a big mistake, and many boulevards that were built in the 20th century are now turned into pedestrian streets, just like it was before. So it looks like it all failed. And the Northern District? Well, that one failed too. Today, the Northern District is majorly being used as an administrational center. And after the working hours, the whole area pretty much looks like this. Quite liminal, isolated, and alone standing, as the last reminder of the improvisational urbanism that took place over here. The situation is quite evident on site. The southern frontier is completely cut off by these big boulevards and underground tunnels. As you can see, these multi-lane boulevards that are bordering the southern frontier of the Northern District last for quite a while, and there is actually only two portions where there is a smooth transition between the Northern District and the rest of the urban environment. The western side is continuously blocked off by the railway infrastructure, such as the tunnels over there, and the western part has been disconnected by the canal. So it obviously looks like that area was specifically designed to be kept like in a vacuum or in a buffer. Literally, the whole streetscape is framed by these kind of massive walls that are pushing you away from the buildings. Then everywhere you have this strange relationship between objects and humans, like it's completely out of the proportions, and some of the public spaces that are meant to be used by some of the residents and workers in the administrational centers over here look quite liminal and empty like this. As you can see, there is no content in the space. Plenty of these strange corners that were generated by the shape of the buildings, which definitely are abandoned and give you intimidating feeling, like you don't want to be walking around very often. And therefore, as you can see, they're not even inviting, neither they're attracting people to use them. And some of the green spaces with a lot of potential, but they often give you a feeling like it is a no man's land. I mean, this place is burden for the citizens. So can we fix it? Well, from our experience and insights, there are actually multiple ideas that could be implemented, and you should keep them in mind as creative design principles. Densification. Densification and functional mix. As you can see, they're trying to introduce more housing in this area, which is great. But the problem is that very often we see the ground floor not active, which means there is no commercial activities or any kind of idea for activating the ground floor. And also we are not quite sure how much variety of apartment units there are and what is the ownership program over there. But on the other hand, on this side over here, you can see a bit wider sidewalk, and there are terraces on the ground floor, which allows, as you can see maybe to see there, to use the sidewalk as some kind of an improvised front garden. And maybe you can see how the kids are playing their ball, and it immediately gives different kind of feeling and sensation in the neighborhood. There is one child standing on the terrace, the other kids are on the sidewalk, and they're passing the ball like a volleyball over the railing from the balcony, which is quite nice. Transfer of energies. So the Northern District is also in contact with this kind of very vibrant shopping street on the other side from the railway infrastructure. And there is a big potential for infiltrating all of this energy throughout the buildings on the other sides. For example, I can imagine a portable snack vendor trucks or coffee trucks or kind of a vans that's from here they can distribute food on the other side. All of this over here, what you see, it's a good economical and social energy that can be transmitted on the other side where it was, as you have seen, very dead and deserted. Soft edges. These walls that you see behind me, they're really giving a sturdy feeling and they're hard framing of the streetscape. They're actually the reminiscence of the original idea for building a plinth where people will be walking under the towers. However, today what we have is this. And yes, instead of making them a little bit softer, they can actually serve as a great support structure for implementing intermediate pop-up structures. For example, canopies, winter gardens, extensions for restaurants, or maybe even different kind of activities that can kind of spill towards the public space. Accessible and public upper floors. So all the time we're talking about how the ground floor from these big skyscrapers is very sturdy and it pushes you away from the buildings and there is no merging energy between people and buildings. And in order to fix that, we don't have to necessarily morph the walls in some other ways and make them more dynamic and interactive. What we can also do is, for example, strip and open up the first few levels from the buildings and make them accessible for people. For example, we can introduce food corners, elevated market streets, or also there could be some kind of shopping streets located on the upper floors from the buildings. This inevitably reminds us of some of the hawking centers in Singapore, where you have big giant buildings and the ground floors, the first 4 or 5 floors, are kind of open for economical local dynamics. And there is maybe a start of that over here, where this big kind of common winter garden is being introduced. As we can see, it's a big structure with plenty of vegetation inside and places for sitting. But of course now it's locked up and we're not sure if it's going to be inclusively used, but it's a good concept to be thinking of. Transitional spaces. As you can see right now, we're at the edges of the Northern District. And what is very interesting is that over there you have more of the original urban fabric of Brussels, and in between the houses they have introduced a linear park that stretches through a long distance but is very narrow, but slowly kind of takes you towards this big nice park where it's surrounded by mixed housing living. There is playground, there is school, and from this nice green open space slowly you're being taken towards the Northern District. As we always say, any eventual solution should follow a deliberate study and extensive research on ground. In addition to this, there is a creative idea that is pushed by some of the leading parties involved closely in the process of restoring this district. And to be honest, it makes a lot of sense. Since the Northern Districts resembles a result of an improvisational urbanism, maybe it should continue to operate as such. In other words, this area may serve a greater purpose if it's used as an improvisational, experimental area for urban redevelopment that can generate answers for the upcoming challenges such as environmental and social sustainability, housing crisis, and circular economy. In fact, now that multiple renting leases of the towers in the Northern Districts are about to expire, it seems like it's a perfect time for rethinking the existing models of ownership and governance of space between the public sector, the private sector, and the authorities, and to look for solutions that will be beneficial for all. If this area can function as a creative laboratory for making better city, then the historical unjust might be corrected. To be more specific, professionals from the private sector, from the academia and NGO organizations such as this over here are working on implementing ideas such as real-time circular economy, hybrid business districts, temporary use policies, and many other prototypes that might be great for all the cities around the world and not just for Brussels. And as always, we would like to quickly wrap up this video with one of our reflection sketches. As you can see on the screen, we have metaphorically illustrated an urban development that comes out of the head of one single man. It is closed with a glass dome and connected with different sort of cables and tubes, which we would like to suggest that this urban development can see as an experimental laboratory. Why? Well, to be honest, according to us, whenever there is some urbanization in the city initiated by one single person or limited group of people, then that can be seen as a crime, as something that shouldn't be happening in the city. Fixing these kind of developments forever, it's also somehow like validating the crime. What we can do is the opposite. If these developments has been conducted by limited group of people, by individuals, then We should introduce as many possible players in the game of redesigning these kind of areas. And will be even better if we don't give concrete solutions, if we can use these places as creative playgrounds for finding new prototypes for better urban living. Thank you very much for following. Please feel free to comment and to share, subscribe of course, and we're talking a lot about urbanism and urbanization in this video. If you are still interested, you can also follow the next videos about ignorant urbanization. Stay well, keep stripping the architecture of the city and see the hidden complexities in your neighborhoods.